think changing Zoom rooms also keeps people on their toes during a meeting, though.
Great. Well, it looks like people are still joining us. I'm not sure if there are more questions on the career pathways. LaDonna, I know that you've had some questions in discussions we've had before about alternative on-ramps that for people with disabilities. I don't know if you want to ask anything about that, because I think that's a very interesting observation.
Yeah, and thank you, David. And, you know, as you and I have talked, you know, I work with a lot of people with disabilities and people coming out of the judicial system. And, you know, I like the career pathways. I think it's great. I think it's very needed. But I also would like for us at some point to think about, you know, how we can help people who maybe learn differently, to be able to include all people with disabilities and people who, again, learn differently, to have a career pathway so that they can reach their highest potential, but maybe aren't able to go through like a post-secondary education. Are there alternate ways for people to learn maybe more hands-on and receive some sort of certification? Just so that we can acknowledge that, you know, there is a large segment of these populations that we're looking at that, you know, aren't able to benefit from a post-secondary education and learn differently.
Right. And frankly, a lot of them, I mean, that different learning approach is a lot of what has sort of excluded them from workforce and education opportunities in the past. So actually, if we look at targeted populations, a lot of them are going to, a disproportionate number are likely to be people with learning differences.
Mm-hmm. Who kind of, you know, get stuck, who have a lot of ability to learn, but, you know, again, don't learn in the way that these things have always been taught. So it's just something that I would like for this group to kind of keep in mind as, you know, as we look forward. And you know, like I say, the career pathways that is outlined here is great, but I think we need to really look at some other on-ramps and maybe off-ramps so that, again, people who learn differently can also achieve their highest level.
Amy, do you want to address that first? I have not the most heartwarming things to say, but a few points.
It doesn't look like Amy's made it back yet, so.
Okay. So yes, I mean, absolutely. One of the things that I know there was some thought, or a great deal of thought put into it, at least when the Unified State Plan was being crafted, and for this pathway definition, that there should be multiple entry and exit points. So the goal was that not necessarily traditional, if you will, one standard way of learning education process was the only way in or out. Some of the training providers that offer and are approved to provide credentialing courses do have a much more flexible learning style, learning process, the more about hands-on and creating. But absolutely, I think it should be the charge of all of us to make sure that this is at the forefront as things are, like as the Unified State Plan is being reviewed, that it's considered more, that it's thought of more. I would also say the only thing that does give me some, not the only thing, but the one thing that does give me some of that old social worker feeling that I need in order to survive after 1 year at the state and 40 years in social services is that individualized tailored planning is what most WIOA service providers have done all along. Like they work individually. And I think, I don't know if it was Sarah or Molly had that slide where it shows the different path or the path that includes that individualized assessment, the individualized exploration, all of those things to help the individual find if the career pathway is the right thing for them. It may not be, you're right, but that individual focus has got to be prioritized. And if there's a way we can highlight that more in any revisions, I think we have enough loud voices here to make sure that happens.
You should do that. Great. Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions on this, or we can? Absolutely, Donna. Great. Why don't we move on to the next topic? I do want us to spend a little bit of time trying to make some choices around this webinar we've talked about. So this goes back a little ways. We've talked about this a couple of times. We've categorized the barriers to employment into 4 categories. Physical barriers, so issues about getting to work and the physical design of the workplace to enable someone to be successful. Employer and job readiness, so this is both training and skill building on the side of the candidate as well as on the employer side. And finally, looking at models and acceptance/awareness to kind of keep people successfully employed over time, so that they don't just sort of bounce off of the job. We sent out a survey with those listed, sort of to identify priorities from different people. And one of the things we got back as feedback in that was some ideas for additions or modifications to that list. And these are some of the these are the comments that we received. I think they seem to fall like into 2 categories to me. There's one about thinking more about service integration as part of this, where how does a local community-based organization collaborate, get involved in this to be part of the solution. So it is both business and state, but also there's community-based organizations, because for a lot of people, that's a key support for them in terms of finding, integrating and succeeding in a job. And then the second big category was the idea of adding awareness and acceptance, or acceptance in to broaden our definition that we had there under awareness. So unless anybody has any objections, I guess I would suggest that we do include something around the I think we brought in we have acceptance in there. I think we brought in that acceptance to also be around awareness, and that we add the idea here of community-based, of service integration or community-based participation. So,
hey, David,
yeah,
if I could just
please.
make just talk about a little bit about one of our people and what happened, and how some of these community-based organizations, I think, could be so important. And that we had a client who was very intelligent, who was on the spectrum. And so he would drive over to the community college, and he would never go into class because his anxiety overtook him. So he could do all of the things except get into that classroom. And unfortunately, we became involved too late that he is like, I just never want to do that again. I never want to try that again, which is unfortunate because he is incredibly intelligent, And so, we have taught him how to manage that anxiety and, to do those things so that he can further on develop. But, if we could have been there at the front, he could be so successful by now. And so I just want to kind of share a story of why that support up front is so important.
Yeah, we've talked a couple of times today about sort of person-centered planning, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that idea that helping create a plan that's right for that individual is very important. And I think that is really important with the career pathways, because since they sort of roll out of the school system, so that's where a lot of them start, the career pathways start is in secondary school, to make sure that particularly as people are handed off, whether it's into transition programs or out of the high school, that the same levels of support that they find in high school. You know, that continues, because otherwise people can have experiences like you described. Very much. Great. So people voted on, we sent out a little survey, and people voted on the topics they would like to discuss. You know, these are the results, and you can see some of the comments that that people have written as well. And you know, some of these are around acceptance and other points of integration that I think are important. There does seem to be, you know, this first one's about awareness. The second one is around, you know, how career training can also fit in with this. And then again, you have the alternative learning. Thoughts on this? So employer and job readiness, can you just go back a couple of clicks to just show what those were for people to remember?
What were they? Oh, go back to.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah. And then one more.
So these were things about job design, getting people ready and employers ready for people to join. So this part is focused very much on the hiring process. So getting hired and getting started, or getting ready, getting hired and getting started, was where a lot of the focus was in these items.
And David, Tom and Pat both posted comments
okay.
in the chat as well.
Yeah, Tom. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
had a quick question. My concern was the physical barriers are really important, particularly in the business area. And I wonder who takes responsibility for A, advocating for the disabled with the business, and B, preparing the businesses to be in a place to be able to accept those people. Is that the business services department? Is that the job counselor? Or how does that get coordinated? Because that's a really important issue to address, but it's something that most employers probably don't recognize. They're going to have to change some things to make this work.
Right, and it's also, I think it's a point of fear also among business people, that they don't know, and so then they're like, oh, I don't know, so I don't want to try, I don't want to invest because I'm scared of it or concerned about it. Well, I think that's some of the point that like LaDonna was making before, like there needs to be, she was talking about it specifically in an educational context, but I think the exact same kind of thing happens in a workplace context where people, they don't have someone to advocate for themselves, and they have sort of mixed capability of being able to do that for themselves. And so I think that's one of the challenges. I don't know who is accountable for that in the process of trying to find somebody with a disability a job. Like, is that something that DRS does? Is that a community-based organization? Is that somebody else? I don't know.
I mean, as a community-based organization, that's exactly what we do. We go in when, you know, somebody gets a job, we go in and we work with the employer to help out however we can, whether it's with training, you know, if there's an issue, you know, we can go in and we can help, you know, we help the employer to learn how best to work with that client, you know, around, you know, different things. And so that's exactly what we do for as long as necessary.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Eric Hansen with DRS. Same thing here with our voc rehab counselors working with businesses. And, you know, another piece of the puzzle is job retention. So folks that have disability that, you know, maybe they're becoming, you know, more impaired over time, you know, we can work with employers and those individuals to make sure that, you know, accommodations can be developed and continue to be there, and the support be there so they don't lose their job. So it's just not even on the front end, but it's also kind of throughout the lifespan of their employment there. So,
right, yeah, right. I think that's one of the big challenges, right? That people, if supports can get set up, they're usually only there for 90 days. And so, you know, we want people to stay employed for a lot longer than that. And
Yeah.
Great. And yeah, Pat had a comment about he's suggesting more forward-thinking term like engagement versus acceptance. Yeah, I think that that Pat raises, I think, an important point here. I mean, acceptance is a fairly low bar to set for how businesses and people at businesses should interact with the new employees. And so that we should actually think about setting a higher bar for that, like term Pat suggests is engagement. And I think that's right. They should something more along those lines as the objective of what we're trying to get, not just sort of, yeah, like I said, a low bar. So Pat, if I miss anything in that interpretation, certainly chime in, but.
No, thanks, Dave. That's exactly my point.
Great. So Mike, we go into the next slide. So great. So I think that with two things in mind that have sort of come out of our conversation here today. The first is the conversation we had about career pathways, and particularly, I think, the high priority industries of healthcare, manufacturing, and IT. And then the priorities that we all sort of felt in that prior slide through voting of what we thought were the biggest priorities, and start to think about topics potentially for a webinar in October. So I'm not sure if people have any immediate ideas on this. To give an example of, and maybe Molly, you and Sarah can help with this a little bit, examples of what the webinars have had in the past. Molly, do you have any topics? This is the Workforce Wednesdays, right?
Yep. So basically, you know, our webinar would be on a Wednesday, likely from 10 to 11:30 a.m. And in the past, the CPTP has hosted 2 workforce webinars. One was on returning citizens, the topic of returning citizens. And the way we structured that was a panel type method. So we had a number of employers and employees go through a question and answer session, discuss some of their models of employment, and then we opened it up for some Q&A in the chat. We also had a webinar talking about service integration, specifically within employing individuals with disabilities, and that was focused on one specific region. And so within that webinar, again, we had a panel format where we had several different employers on, and we did a Q&A. So that's how we've done it in the past, and typically that's pretty facilitated because these webinars aren't like these Zoom meetings where we can, like, everyone's camera is showing and participants speak. It's more chat engagement. So, you know,
because there are dozens of participants at these typically, yeah. Right?
Yeah, we get anywhere from like 60 to 200. So they're a pretty big group, and so you know, something that's worked really well has been a work group like this coming up with a list of questions or topics, and then having a number of employers, and then someone like David or someone else from this group be the facilitator. So that's worked really well. That doesn't mean that's what it needs to be, though.
Great. I do think that those help. I think it's hard anytime you have a meeting where you have only 1 or 2 voices for an hour. And the nice thing about the panel format is that you do get multiple voices. So I think even if, you know, you let people, I've been on one of them where they gave each person like 10 minutes to talk, to kind of tell their story. And then they did Q&A after that. So you get a little bit of the sort of somebody being able to say something in a structured way, in an organized way. And then also some of the more dynamic interactions that you get from a panel. So I guess this is brainstorming time about what we think we could have a conversation about that would be interesting to a broad group of workforce engaged people. I mean, you know, I think the conversation we had about how community-based organizations participate in the process, I think could be interesting, definitely.
David, I'm wondering if the people attending this webinar would be interested in how to have, or the nature of the conversation between a business and the business services or the LWIP department, because I have a sense that, I don't know if this is true, that there might be a lot of people, not a lot, some people, practitioners, that might be hesitant to know how to talk about this particular population and getting the business engaged, to sell them on the idea, to sell them that how important it is to engage this population, because this is one of the large groups of large populations that's available for employment and looking for employment, and ends up being loyal employees. So I'm not sure that everybody knows what to say about this population in terms of with the businesses.
Kind of tips and tricks and techniques.
Yeah, I think both sort of almost like selling the talent pool, if you will, a little bit.
Yes, I think that's important. I think that's necessary, because I don't think, remember when I was an employer, I thought it was pretty simple. Just find somebody that fit. It was just put a slot in, and there was nothing to it. You didn't have to make any changes to be able to do that, right? Well, the world is different now. That's the part that needs to be. That's the story that needs to be told.
This is
Right.
Michelle from DRS.
Yeah.
And I would also, one other thought is to have customers or individuals with disabilities on the panel to also share their experience and what was helpful, how they worked with, whoever helped to get them to where they are.
Categories. So, that could be just a pretty interesting thing about, how does it work? And we talk about some of the employer and job readiness topics. Like we could look for people who have a point of view on training that was provided, or on accommodations. Tom, you mentioned earlier, like people understanding what accommodations are and are not generally necessary, and how simple or difficult that can be.
I think if you had an employer talk about making that journey of saying, I want to do this, then what do you have to do? What did I have to do as a business person to make that happen? What did I have to accept? That kind of thing. It might be helpful for people on the practitioner side to hear, so that they kind of knew what the challenges were the business community faced when they're thinking about hiring this population.
Yeah, Tom agreed, and Giselle, to your point, many years ago, Dave, you and I met as I was directing enablement, as you were getting ready to launch. And we had an initiative called Breaking Down Barriers, where we would have several professionals with disabilities in tech. And we would bring employers in and ask them questions regarding their experience, accommodations, culture, job readiness, etc. So I think, to Giselle's point, the disability perspective is critical to both informing before process takes place and throughout process. Many DME companies who developed wheelchairs, and this is something I know from working in the industry and 41 years in a chair, used to develop ultralight equipment without any disability insight, and most failed. So anyway, I think this is a key conversation.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I agree would echo everybody's perspective on having people with disabilities as a significant part of this conversation, for sure. Also interesting, I think, Pat, one of the things you mentioned, which also could be good, is to look for somebody from an IT role in this, because I think, and that's one of the targeted industries or career pathways, and so that would line up pretty well with that. So this this sort of idea of, so what are the dynamics of employing people with disabilities? Like, how do you have to get prepared? Who do you partner with? What are the barriers? What are the things that are important for being successful? That kind of overall topic seems, pretty interesting to people. That was a question, I guess, maybe more than I said it as a statement, but that was more a question. Does that make sense for people as a
yeah.
area? Yeah. So great. I think that's one possibility for us to look around. Do people have ideas of, this will be a little bit iterative, but do people have ideas of speakers? I mean, I know a speaker, we have a program at a manufacturing facility in West Chicago that the CEO came in, he wanted to start this program, and he can talk about, he or someone on his team can talk about the process they went through to pick people, what partners they look for, and so forth. So that would be one possibility that we could, and we have 20 people working there now. So, it would be something that has, a success profile to it as well. There are people in IT, but the people I know in IT that are doing this are generally big or specialty companies focused on hiring people with disabilities. So we can talk to some of the big people. Pat, I don't know if SPR still has a program that they could talk about, but I know what they were doing was really good for a while.
I manage our civic engagement. David's changed, but I've shifted to directing more community platforms like Equal Access, which we're relaunching. But if you need a senior or an executive in tech, I'm sure between you and I, we'd identify that.
Great. So what I'd suggest now, just as we're sort of winding down to 2 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, similar to the survey we went out last time, why don't Molly, Sarah, and I get together and think about a couple of questions to give you some time to think about it. We'll send out a survey or a little questionnaire with some questions you can think about it, get back to us, and then when we come back we can set another meeting here in August and come together and focus on trying to identify speakers. Does that sound good to people? Awesome. So look for that survey here over the next week or so, and also look for a date for us. Molly, we do not yet have a date on the calendar, do we?
You're right. We need to set one, so we can create a doodle poll for that one.
Okay, great. Thank you. Awesome. So thanks, everybody. I thought this was a really productive meeting. I know I learned a bunch, and thank you all for your time. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
everyone.